Now, the beauty of this particular antipsychotic story is that there is a group in northern Finland that 20 years ago rethought their use of antipsychotics, and they developed a form of care called open dialogue therapy, which I think many of you have heard of. And they now have reported their best 5 long-term outcomes for schizophrenia and psychotic patients of any country in the Western world. And the way it works is this, we can maybe talk about it more. There's a lot of psychosocial care right up front, okay? They try to get people help right away. They use medications in this way. They do not put people on antipsychotics initially. They do use benzodiazepines if necessary to restore sleep-wake. Now, if someone's not getting better after 3-4 weeks, then they use antipsychotics, so it's a delayed use model. And you'll find at the end of, this is just the model, results. At the end of 5 years, 80% of their first episode psychotic patients are working or back in school. Only 20% have gone on to long-term disability. So basically, they have converted first episode psychosis into an episodic disorder. And only a small people are becoming chronic. And you'll see in terms of medication use, 67% have never been exposed to antipsychotics after 5 years. Another 13% have been exposed temporarily, and then 20% use them regularly. So it's a selective use model. It's a model meant to figure out for whom and for how long, rather than one size fits all. They absolutely think that medications have can be an important tool, but you have to use them in this sort of subtle, artful way. You see the final thing, working or in school, unemployed 7%? So of those people that are now in the workforce, their unemployment rate when they were doing these studies was lower than it was for the Finnish population as a whole. That's how good they were doing about getting people back on employed. Now, one of the reasons I like to spend more time on the antipsychotic story, whether or not it's of the most interest, it has to do with what we think we know to be true. Because if there's anything society knows to be true, it's that antipsychotics are absolutely essential, that you're sort of crazy if you suggest that maybe there should be a different model. And we also have a lot of societal pressure around forcing people to take antipsychotic medications. At least we do in the US. I imagine you do in Denmark and all. So just as a way, if part of today is to say we're putting common beliefs under a microscope, the antipsychotics is a good story to show that the common wisdom around these drugs just doesn't hold up when you try to really dig into the long-term literature. And I think what you see in the long-term literature is a fairly consistent story. Early on we saw, right? We saw like the hint of a paradox in the very first longer-term study. And then we saw those studies in the 1970s where each time they found something different than they thought. Then people came up with a biological explanation. Then we get MRI studies that raise questions. Then we get a prospective long-term study by Harrow. Then we get a randomized study. Then we get a medication compliance study. We have the cross-cultural study. You see how all these pieces are sort of, they're really coming together to a larger story? It's not one study, it's a larger story of science, I think, that is on display here.